Well, good morning again. After 2 weeks of taking an excursus to talk about angels, we are now back to the book of Daniel to close out the remaining 5 chapters. Now, up until this point, we've been taking it chapter by chapter and looking at each story to talk about what those stories have to tell us. But today, what we're going to do is look at the remaining 5 chapters as a whole. And summarize what they mean. And then, so for the next 2 weeks, we'll look at Daniel 7 through 12. Then in the third week, we're going to look at the overall message of Daniel to discern what it has to say for our lives as the people of God. The reason that I decided to look at the 5 chapters as a whole is because they contain what is known as apocalyptic literature. And I want to take some time today to teach you what apocalyptic literature is, to teach you how to read apocalyptic literature, and then just briefly help us understand together what the apocalyptic literature in Daniel, at least Daniel chapter 7, is trying to say to us. So let's jump right in by defining the word. So what does apocalyptic literature, what does apocalypse mean? What does apocalypse mean? Now, once again, this is one of those areas where Hollywood really misleads us and shapes the definition of how we understand apocalypse. Because in Hollywood, when we hear that an apocalyptic film is coming out, we think about movies like this, right? Movies that spell doom and gloom. The future has come, and it's bleak and dark. It's dystopian. For the kids, it's the time before Wi-Fi was invented, so, there's nothing to do with your phone. And so for most people, when they hear the word apocalypse, they immediately begin thinking of grim, of horror, of things like that. And many people have come to think that the word itself is kind of synonymous with doom and gloom and dystopian reality. But that's not what it really means. In order to find out what any word really means, it's best to look at the origin. And I always like to go back far enough to see when the word began to be used in popular culture, and in many instances that's the Greek or the Latin. So to help us understand the word apocalypse, I went back to the Greek to look up apocalypto, and here's what it means. When you break down the Greek word apocalypto, you'll see the word apo, which means to remove, and calypto, which means to hide. So when we join them together, we get the word apocalypto, which means something like to remove hiddenness, or to reveal, or the more famous word, revelation. In fact, in some older Bibles, the last book of the Bible isn't actually called the Revelation of John, but it's called the Apocalypse of John. So that's what an apocalypse is. It's simply what happens when something that is hidden is made known. So when the Catholic Church, for example, is searching for a new pope, and they send up that white smoke, something apocalyptic is taking place, because something that's hidden to the world but known to the people who are inside is going to be revealed to the people who are outside. It's going to be revealed to the world. So an apocalypse is taking place. For many parents, report card time is an apocalyptic situation, because you've been thinking that your child is an A student, that treats the teachers well. Then that report card comes home, and they're a C student. And the teacher, I used to hate when I get good grades, but the teacher would write, talks too much. Because then the B doesn't really matter anymore, right? Because all your parents see is disruptive in class. And that may as well be an F. But anyway, so report card time for many parents is an apocalyptic event, because something that was hidden is all of a sudden revealed to you. So from now on, when you approach an apocalyptic text in the Bible, don't immediately think about doom or gloom. Don't immediately think that the end is near or anything like that. Don't even primarily think about the future being predicted. Think that something hidden is about to be revealed to everybody. So as James K.A. Smith, a philosopher, once said, apocalyptic literature, the sort you find in the strange pages of Daniel and the book of Revelation, is a genre of scripture that tries to get us to see. That's its primary function. It tries to get us to see. The point of apocalyptic literature is not prediction, but unmasking, unveiling the realities around us for what they really are. So that's what apocalyptic literature is, and that's what it's trying to do for us. It's trying to get us to see. But, in all honesty, that's not really the place where people get hung up. It's not in understanding what the genre is. But the place where many people get hung up is in trying to read and get anything out of apocalyptic literature. If you've ever read for yourself the last 5 chapters of Daniel, or you've read through the book of Revelation, you'll know how difficult it can be to read it and get something out of it that you can apply to your life, because it's so chock full of words and numbers and especially images that are almost like fairy tales that portray things that are boggling to the mind, And this is really why we end up with so many so-called experts who read apocalyptic literature incorrectly, and then they come out thinking that they've deciphered it. They come out saying, I found a hidden code. And then they'll go to the news and say, the world is going to end on May 21st, 2019. And then the world doesn't end. So they figure, maybe I got the math wrong. And they'll go back to the literature and say, okay, the world is going to end on May 21st, 2020. Then that passes. But what they're doing isn't getting the math wrong. They're just reading it incorrectly. God's not sending apocalyptic literature as a cipher into the world so that we can have endless Bible studies and endless code-breaking parties in order to figure out what God is trying to say. I mean, think about how cool of a God that would be. If God really wanted us to know something, and so he said, let me send it to him as a cipher. Let me make it as difficult as possible. That'd be ridiculous. So even the idea of the book of Revelation or the book of Daniel being those kind of books really paints God in a negative picture. So instead of God sending a cipher into the world, he sends this kind of literature, this apocalyptic literature, that is meant to encourage us to live as people who are apocalyptic, to go out into the world with the good news of Jesus Christ, so that everybody who doesn't yet see what has been revealed to his people can see through the lives of his people. So the reason these so-called experts get it fantastically and humorously incorrect, I say again, is because of the way that they're reading it. They're trying to analyze and dissect what was meant to be seen and what was meant to be felt, what was meant to be heard. In other words, apocalyptic literature is not meant to be read the way many of us adults read all the stuff that we read. See, we're trained by and large to read for comprehension, right? We derive meaning from the words that are on the page. This is why it's important for grown-ups to have a wide knowledge of the dictionary, of the thesaurus, to be well read so that we can understand what's taking place in arguments and dialogues, and so that our comprehension can increase. So we read, and then we have book studies, and then we write book reviews, and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying anything wrong with that. You should have a wide grasp of the English language. You should know many words. You should be able to be conversant at many different levels. But that kind of approach will not work for apocalyptic literature. It just will not work at all. But if you want to get the most out of apocalyptic literature, you're going to have to suspend your adult approach to books and to reading for a moment, and you're going to have to become like a child. In other words, you're going to have to listen, but do so with your eyes. Listen with your eyes, okay? Because that's how small kids take in stories, isn't it? Kids listen to the stories you read with their eyes. Not with their ears primarily, but they listen with their eyes. They don't try to comprehend the story. They try to see the story. Some of you might remember reading books to your children or your grandchildren. If you read a book to your kids, and I'm talking about small kids, and that thing doesn't have pictures in it, you might as well shut it and go do something else. Because what do they want to do? They want to see. Don't just tell me about the dragon. Show me a picture. Let me see what the dragon looks like, right? They want to see it. And even in children's books, the entire page is filled with pictures. Sometimes when I'm reading adult books, I get excited when one page has a picture of something they've been referring to. But in children's books, you have to find the words hidden in the midst of the huge artistic work, right? Because children's books are meant to be seen, not primarily to be heard, but they're meant to be seen. That's letting us know what's most important is actually not the words, but the pictures. And so as you're describing the big red dragon with fire coming out, what do? You turn the book to your kids so that they can see it. Because seeing is what's most important when it comes to children's books, and seeing is what's most important when it comes to apocalyptic literature. So then, with that in mind, let us begin listening with our ears. But first, let me tell you, there's a man named G.K. Chesterton. If you don't know him, if you haven't read his books, he's a brilliant Christian author. This is a review he wrote for one of the Christian books that was published for children way back in his day. Listen to the poem that he wrote. He said, "This is the sort of book we like, for you and I are very small, with pictures stuck in anyhow, and hardly any words at all. You will not understand a word of all the words, including mine. Never you trouble, for you can see, and all directness is divine. Stand up and keep your childishness. Read all the pedant's creeds and strictures, but don't believe in anything that can't be told in colored pictures." So let's take the advice from G.K. Chesterton and from children and remember what Jesus said about children. Theirs is the kingdom of God. So let's become like children and learn to see the picture that God is painting for us. Because in that way, the apocalyptic literature will come alive to us. So with all that groundwork being laid, I want you to listen with your eyes as I read a portion of Daniel's apocalyptic literature. But before we get there, remember the context that this is taking place in. So the first verse is going to say, "In the first year of the reign of King Belshazzar." Does anybody remember who King Belshazzar was? I know you're just being humble. King Belshazzar is the king who had the party and the writing on the wall happened, right? So if you remember from our series back then, he was a very wicked king. He was anti-Semitic. He was bringing back oppression for the Jews. And so this is the context in which it's in. It's before the lion's den, but right after the death of King Nebuchadnezzar. So that lets us know what's happening around Daniel. He's a Jewish person. The king is trying to oppress Jews. And then one night, he gets this vision. Now let's see the picture that God is trying to paint for Daniel and for us as well. "In the year of the reign of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. What he saw as he slept in his bed terrified him, a real nightmare. Then he wrote out his dream. In my dream that night, I saw the four winds of heaven whipping up a great storm on the sea. 4 huge animals, each different from the others, ascending out of the sea. The first animal looked like a lion, but it had the wings of an eagle. While I watched, its wings were pulled off. It was then pulled erect so that it was standing on 2 feet like a man. Then a human heart was placed in it. Then I saw a second animal that looked like a bear. It lurched from side to side, holding 3 ribs in its mouth. It was told, 'Attack, devour, fill your belly.' Next I saw another animal. This one looked like a panther. It had 4 bird-like wings on its back. This animal had 4 heads and was made to rule. After that, a 4th animal appeared in my dream. This one was a grisly horror. It was hideous. It had huge iron teeth. It crunched and swallowed its victims. Anything left over, it trampled into the ground. It was different from the other animals. This one was a real monster. It had 10 horns. As I was staring at the horns and trying to figure out what they meant, another horn sprouted up, a little horn. 3 of the original horns were pulled out to make room for it. There were human eyes in this little horn and a big mouth speaking arrogantly. As I was watching all this, thrones were set in place and the old one sat down. His robes were white as snow. His hair was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, its wheels blazing. A river of fire poured out of the throne. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000s attended him. The courtroom was called to order, and the books were opened. I kept watching. The little horn was still speaking arrogantly. Then as I watched, the monster was killed, and its body cremated in a roaring fire. The other animals lived on for a limited time, but they didn't really do anything. They had no power to rule. My dream continued. I saw a human form, a son of man arriving in a whirl of clouds. He came to the old one and was presented to him. He was given power to rule, all the glory to royalty. Everyone, race, color, and creed had to serve him. His rule would be forever, never ending. His kingly rule would never be replaced. Okay, so keeping in mind that apocalypse means uncovering or revealing something that was hidden, let me ask you this question. What is this vision trying to reveal to Daniel? It was very vivid, wasn't it? Lions with wings like eagles, leopards with wings on its back, a creature that's unknown, can't be described. What it's trying to reveal to Daniel is what earthly governments look like from a heavenly perspective. Remember, this dream is being revealed to him in the first year of the reign of King Belshazzar, an oppressive king, a king that uses violence, a king that hates the Jews, a king that's going to lead them back into persecution. This dream, this vision is trying to let Daniel know this is what the governments of the world look like when you see them from heaven. You know, it's kind of like how you might try to tell children, if you're writing a children's book and you wanted to tell children that they shouldn't play in the street, you wouldn't just write, don't play in the street, but you might make the street be this place filled with wild dogs and alligators and things like that. Why? So that they can equate the street is dangerous. I shouldn't play in a place where there's wild dogs and animals that want to do me harm. So in the same way, God is telling Daniel, and us by extension, when you pull back the curtain and really see what human authority looks like, what you'll see is something like a vicious beast, something like an animal, lions with wings of eagles, gigantic bears with ribs in its mouth. If you see a bear with ribs in its mouth, you know that brother just got done eating. He just got done feasting, you know. There's a body somewhere that those ribs belong to. Leopards with 4 wings on its back. And what's more, if you were someone that was a Jewish person in Daniel's day listening to this story, one of the parts that would have alarmed you is where these animals emerged from. Did any of you see that? Who remembers where the animals emerged out of? They came from the sea. You remember what the sea means in Jewish literature? The sea represents chaos and evil. So whenever Jewish people are hearing these stories and the sea is mentioned, they know, the bad guy just showed up. It says 4 huge animals, each different from the others, ascended out of the sea. They came out of the sea. The sea represents chaos and evil. That's why in Genesis it says that darkness covered the face of the waters. And in Exodus, the Israelites had to be delivered from Egypt through the Red Sea, through God conquering and parting the Red Sea. Then in the Gospels, what does Jesus do with the water? He calms it. The disciples are afraid. Jesus is sleeping. He stands up and he calms the seas. And at another point, remember, he walked upon the sea. He walks on water. Then you turn to the book of Revelation, and what does it say in the last chapter? Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. No more sea. So this picture says all earthly kingdoms emerge from the sea. They emerge from wickedness. They emerge from chaos. And since they emerge from chaos and wickedness, they will eventually lead in ways that are brutal, in ways that are oppressive, in ways that aren't conducive to God's plan of righteousness. So for Daniel and for the rest of the exiles who are right now living under the reign of King Belshazzar, they now know that the new king and his cabinet are actually wolves in sheep's clothing. They're ravenous monsters. That the only way they know how to lead is with power, with authority, with might, with violence. And we would do well to remember that too. Because as you saw in this vision, it didn't just cover the time when Daniel was alive, but this vision went on into the eternity of eternities. This was a vision that spanned the history of humanity. So this vision is describing all governments of human origin. Not just King Belshazzar. All governments are beastly when you look at them from a heavenly standpoint. They all emerge from the sea. Oh, now you're probably thinking, I thought he said apocalyptic literature wasn't all doom and gloom, but it sounds like doom and gloom to me. And you're correct. It's not all doom and gloom, because within this bad news, there's great news. There's really great news. Even though the beasts were terrifying, if you were seeing with your ears, they were all under the control of a stronger power, weren't they? What happened to the lion? Its wings were removed. What kind of powerful figure removes wings from a lion? You know? Did you hear what the bear was told to do? As if the bear was somebody's pet. The bear was commanded to go and devour and kill and eat. As if it's the same way you may tell your dog. You know, you lay out your food for your dog and then you say, hey, Fido, go and eat. Someone did that to the bear. So even though these creatures are vicious, this vision tells us they're still under the sovereignty. They're still under the authority of God. Now, this is a message we learned through King Nebuchadnezzar's life, isn't it? With all his power, with all his might, he was still under the sovereign reign of God. It's only the fourth creature, which is such a monstrosity that the writer can't even think of an animal to compare it to. Its teeth were made of iron. It had horns all over its head, and a horn grew with a mouth and with eyeballs. And this beast, unlike the other three, was trying to unseat God. It can speak blasphemous words about God and tries to change the laws of God. But then, once this monstrosity comes upon the scene, and right when everyone looking at it is probably frightened out of their mind, the scene suddenly shifts. So once evil reaches its climax, the scene shifts to the throne room of God. And there, everything is the complete opposite of this earthly vision. In the earthly vision, there's violence, bloodshed, wrath, everything like that. There's fear and trembling and signs of coming persecution. But in the heavenly vision, there's nothing but peace. There's nothing but purity. The old one, or as other translations call him, the Ancient of Days, sits on a throne with a pure white robe with white woolly hair. His throne was a flaming fire, all symbols of purity, all symbols of holiness, all symbols of peace. So in the final analysis, we get the picture that the world is full of darkness and wickedness, but God is in control. That's what my preaching professor told me. He said, when you read the Bible and when you preach the Bible, there's one theme. The world is a place of darkness, but Jesus is the light of the world. God is in control. God is always in control. Okay, but what are we supposed to do with this? When Daniel woke up, what was he supposed to do with it? That's his question. That's also our question. What do we do now? Do we just dismiss it and say, I had some bad pizza and, that's the cause of the dream? What do we do with it? Here's the answer. Once we've seen what the governments of the world look like from a heavenly vantage point, the first thing we do is never forget. Never forget about it. The second thing we do is act with wisdom. In the same way, once your children know that the street is dangerous, they should never forget it. If their ball goes running into the street, that knowledge that the street is dangerous should cause them to stop right at the edge of the sidewalk, which is acting with wisdom. And that's the same for Daniel. It's the same for us. Once Daniel knew that from a heavenly standpoint, King Belshazzar and his cabinet and all earthly governments resemble beasts that use violence to get their way. He must never forget it. He must never put his trust in them. Because you don't trust in animals. You don't trust in beasts. Rather, both he and us should put our trust in the one who was seated on the throne, the one who had real power and real authority. We must put our trust in the Son of Man who was presented before the Ancient of Days, the one that has said his reign would last forever and ever and ever and ever. Is this not a relevant and timely message for us with less than 2 months to go before another presidential election? When you consider the climate that we're now in, when you consider the fact that many people, especially Christians, are being lured into the trap of finding their identity, finding their security, finding their peace, finding their worthiness in political identifications. No. Remember what God is telling us in this children's story. All of them, even at their best, are bestial. So does that mean we shouldn't engage in the political process? No, it doesn't mean that at all. After all, look at Daniel. After Daniel had this vision, he went on to serve 3 more kings. He went on to be promoted to prime minister. It doesn't get more political than the life that Daniel had. So it doesn't mean that we should disengage from political processes, but he did so with his identity and his confidence firmly rooted in God, firmly rooted in the Ancient of Days. Indeed, that's the clue for what we're all supposed to do, right? Knowing that the Son of Man, whom we Christians know is the promised Messiah, Jesus Christ, is going to receive all honor and glory and dominion and might, knowing that his dominion is going to be eternal, we should decide to serve him now. We should decide to be loyal to him, not to King Belshazzar. He doesn't deserve our loyalty. Not to King Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't deserve our loyalty. Not to King Darius, not to King Cyrus, not to President Trump and the Republicans, not to Joe Biden and the Democrats, but give our loyalty to the Son of Man, whose kingdom will never come to an end. That's what they want. They don't want your vote. They want your loyalty. They want you to see the world the way they see the world. So regardless of the candidate that wins, if the other people are saying the world is going to be a place of darkness, therefore vote for me. No. Don't see the world through their eyes. See the world through heaven's eyes. And seeing the world through heaven's eyes, you'll know my loyalty can only be to the one who sits on the throne. The book of Revelation is even better with its vivid images. There are more dragons and more monsters and more terrifying creatures that would rip apart any human being or any animal if it came within its vicinity. But in the book of Revelation, when there's only one Savior that comes to save all the universe, he comes as a lamb. All these dragons, terrifying, these monsters that can't be described, and it says a little lamb came into the throne room of God. And they all bowed down to worship the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Our loyalty belongs to God. That's what Daniel did, isn't it? When King Darius signed a law saying, you can pray to no gods other than me, what did Daniel do? He went and he prayed to his God. Why? Because he was loyal to his God. That's where his loyalties were. And what happened? Well, the beastly government did what beastly governments do. They threw him into the lions. Then what happened? Well, then the Ancient of Days, who was always in control, sent his angel to deliver Daniel. And then what happened? Well, then the earthly king saw that the God of Daniel was the true Lord of lords and King of kings, and he declared that everybody should worship him instead of worshiping me. See, that's what the church is supposed to be in the world. When our loyalty is with the Ancient of Days, then the world looks and sees. And the world looks and knows. Those who appear to be in power really aren't in power at all. So while they deserve my attention, they do not deserve my loyalty, and I will not give it to them. Only God reigns supreme over everything. There's a new song by one of my favorite Christian singers, a group called Shane and Shane. The words of this song says, though the nations raise, kingdoms rise and fall, there is still one king reigning over all. So I will not fear, for this truth remains, that my God is the Ancient of Days. None above him, none before him, all of time in his hands. For his throne it shall remain and ever stand. All the power, all the glory, I will trust in his name, for my God is the Ancient of Days. See, this vision is not just for Daniel and those of his day, but it's for us as well. And I would suggest to you that it's more for us in our day, as everything's being polarized, everyone's being pulled aside. I got off Facebook 4 years ago because of the elections and seeing what it does to the people of God. You know, pastoral ministry is not about me at all, but it's disheartening when you think that people trust in God, but then you see that they trust in Obama. They trust in Donald Trump. And if their guy doesn't win, their visage is changed. And the way they talk is as if God was removed from the throne. Put your whole trust in the Ancient of Days. Therefore, let the one who has ears hear, the one who has eyes see, take heed and serve the Ancient of Days and his Son, Jesus Christ, who will reign forever and ever and ever and ever. Amen.